What's up, everybody? How's it going? Hello. Welcome to the stream. Probably should have taken a drink before I welcome everybody to the stream. Hey, how's it going? I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of TechInterview.Guide website. Changed things up in the basement here a little bit for the last couple of days. Got the workbench changed up a little bit, so just wanted to kind of say hi to everybody for a couple minutes and share some announcements about stuff going on that will affect the stream and affect what I do. This stream is going to stay exactly the same, but I'm going to be doing some more streaming going forward. So I just kind of want to make people aware of that with what's going to be going on. But let me show you what I've been up to over here. So this is the other half of my sort of workbench, and ignore all the mess down here. I should have probably covered that up, but yeah, this is basically, I rearranged all my 3D printers. I hung this thing up on the wall. It's basically a big cabinet to hold like spools of filament. This thing over here will also hold spools of filament. This little black box that you can't really see back here in the shadows is the Mosaic Palette 2. And it basically will take 4 different colors of filament and splice them together into a single strand of filament. That's going to go onto the Creality printer. This box up here is going to hold somewhere between 6 to 8 spools of filament, maybe, depending on how thick or how wide the spools of filament are. And that's going to go through an upgraded version of the palette. It's the Palette 3, and that's going to go to this Mark 3. And then this Mark 3 is just going to be like regular single color filament. Or actually, I might do the Palette 3 on this one and just have this one run like a single color coming out of the box here. Otherwise, all these things are going to have filament coming through a Palette 3 that I'm probably going to attach on the wall up here and feed down into that printer. So I might swap those two. The printer right behind my head is broken. So this guy back here is busted. So I got to fix that. Seems I've always got one down for maintenance. But anyway, if you're in chat, say hello. Let me know how your week is going. Cool. Let's dive in a little bit on some announcements and kind of what's going on with the stream. So the first thing is November. So my wife and I used to do like this blogging thing way back in the day, and it was like NaBloPoMo or something like that. It was National Blog Posting Month or something, and it was a spin-off of this National Writing Month for November, where authors were challenged to write like 50,000 words of text. And someone kind of spun that off as like, hey, go write a blog post every day for a month. And that got wildly popular. And so my wife and I were like big bloggers back in the day, and I haven't blogged as much over the last couple of years, but I've written a few things up on medium.com from time to time. But I decided this November I was going to kind of get back into some writing. And so what I've done is I basically wanted to revamp some of the daily email series that I've got. So the daily email series is this email subscription thing that I wrote where you can subscribe and you get an email in your inbox every day. And I send them out at 8 a.m. Mountain Time. And basically those emails are kind of presenting common technical interview challenges or technical interview questions that you may face in an interview if you're in the tech industry. Specific to, kind of entry level, intermediate level, maybe a couple of senior level questions in there as well. But what I do a little bit differently on that email series is I don't describe how to answer it technically perfectly. What I do instead is I describe from my perspective as an interviewer. Here's why I'm asking you this question. This is why this question is important to me. And so I kind of address all the questions from that standpoint, but it's a blend of technical questions and behavioral questions. And so one thing that I've had planned out, over the whole year, but then I was out for shoulder surgery for a while, was could I split that into 2 different lists? So have one list for technical questions, one list for behavioral questions. So that was my original plan. Well, as I sat down and started splitting these things out, I realized that some of the questions that I had and some of the stuff that I've covered on the stream cover more than just technical questions and behavioral questions. They're also covering things like, what's the general process? Like, how do you do the company research? How do you apply for those jobs? How do you ask for feedback? That kind of stuff. And so I wanted to So then it turned into 3 different streams, or 3 different email lists. So I wanted to do this general process one. And then there was a 4th list that I'm trying to remember now. It was, just general questions about like, you know, how do like, what are my top tips for getting a tech job? And, you know, the whole thing that I covered in the last Q&A of like, have I ever been fired from a job, and how do you resign with respect and things like that. And I realized that some of that stuff would probably be good for those that aren't going to go dig up YouTube video history and things like that. And so I went through YouTube and I started grabbing all the transcriptions from some of the shorter YouTube videos that I've made. And I'm going to put some of those in a 4th email series. So what is 1 daily email series now is going to split into 4, and people will be able to subscribe to whichever ones they want. Initially, I wanted to have a whole revamped system kind of built up for the subscriber, where you could go in and say, I want this one on this day, I want this one on that day, or I want this one sent every day, I want this one sent like every 2 days, but I didn't get that far. So I'm basically going to have my hands full this month just getting the content rewritten, and then I'm also going to be rewriting part of the website, because some of the information on there is like 4 or 5 years old, and I've kind of updated my perspective and my view on a couple of things. And so I want to go back and revamp some of that. There were whole chapters that I had in draft mode that I never got around to publishing, like things on negotiation tactics and stuff like that. So I want to go through and I want to like revamp a lot of that. So that's my November project, in all this free time that I have, while I ramp up all the 3D printing stuff, you know, over here on the other workbench, because holidays are coming up and people want things 3D printed. And so we'll be 3D printing like, you know, holiday ornaments and you know, little fidget cube things for kids and stuff like that. And part of using the palette things is to allow me to print in multiple colors at the same time. My oldest son took an entrepreneurial class at school, and he basically wants to start selling keychains at school with people's names on them. And so this was actually 3D printed for me by a student of mine at Turing named Rachel. So shout out to Rachel for making that. But these other keychains were just keychains that I made that just have my own name on them. This one's like a flexible filament, so it's meant to bend. This one's a more rigid filament, which doesn't really bend unless you really crank on it, but then it'll snap. But my oldest son wants to basically make keychains with other people's names on them and sell them at school for like $1. So that'll be kind of fun. Let's see. There we go. Got some bit of a network hiccup going on here, so I'm just gonna go over to my Google Home and give my computer all the bandwidth. So we're gonna be ramping up all the 3D printing, kind of 'tis the season sort of thing, and we do like 3D printed vases and stuff like that. I found a couple of vases that are that print so thick they're technically like they'll hold water. Sometimes they're not thick enough to hold water, and the water kind of leaks out in the holes in the plastic. But I found a model that it actually holds water really, really well, and so we'll probably like print those up in huge batches to sell and stuff like that. So yeah, we got all kinds of stuff in the works for the 3D printing, so we'll get all that stuff ramped up. You can see like a leftover little pumpkin head over here behind my my left shoulder. You know, did some 3D printing stuff for Halloween. That was fun. So yeah, so 3D printing stuff is going to be spinning up, but the main thing that I'm going to be working on in November is going to be this daily email series rewrite. But that's going to be a lot of my evening time, along with the mock interviewing and stuff that I do. And then during the daytime, I'm actually going to start working on some open source stuff for work. And the open source software that I want to work on is going to be written in Go. And I'm going to basically be building like a backend Go API that's, you know, purposely for Stream. It's specific to Stream, the company that I work at. And the DevRel team there is going to take that and use that as part of a series. But then I'm going to take that same API and I'm going to do a whole series on how to make that API scalable as well. Ben Radius, good to see you in chat. Hello. Tell me how your week's going. Where are you from? What you drinking? Stay hydrated. All the good stuff. And so I'm going to be live streaming more during the daytime. So I'll be sure that when I'm in my OBS software here that I'm going to be tagging like what I'm actually live streaming about. So the interview prep live stream is still only going to be Sunday night and Thursday night. May take the occasional Sunday off throughout the holidays, depending on what day of the week holidays land on and stuff like that. I haven't looked, but this stream is not going to change. I'm going to be doing additional streaming, which is going to be me coding. And your week and month has been crazy. I know. I can't believe we're into November already, and I can't believe it's Thursday already. It's like, where did this week go? It just disappeared on me. On the East Coast, cool. Good to have you on the stream. So this stream's not going away, but I'm going to be doing additional streaming during the daytime as I'm doing this coding and stuff. And it's just going to be like stream of consciousness of me working through like how to build an API in Go and do like test-driven development with that, and how I plug in like the stream APIs and stuff like that. So I'm going to be doing a stream API for the live chat component that Stream has, as well as the activity feed component. And then the front-end DevRel team, they're going to take that and do all kinds of cool stuff with it. They've got front-end developers and mobile developers, and I'm not sure how they're going to plug that in. I'm just making the API available for them. And then once I get that API done, then I'm going to probably do like a co-hosted stream from time to time, depending on what time of the day I can do it. A lot of our engineering team at Stream are over in Europe and Asia, and they're the folks that know like how we do scalability stuff really, really well. And so I may end up doing some pre-recorded stuff and just play them back on the stream. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But I want to like do some pair programming with them and find out like, hey, what would you do to make this scalable, and think about things like memory constraint, and like bandwidth usage and all that kind of stuff to make this as small and as efficient as possible. And then how do we deploy that on AWS and get into like Docker or something like that, so we can just put the thing out there and spin it up and watch the thing scale. So that's also going to be in November, maybe into December as well. So that live coding is going to happen during the daytime, and like I said, I'll be sure on the stream that when I'm streaming that stuff, you won't see like down here in the bottom corner, you won't see the TechInterview.Guide. It'll be probably a completely different layout, and I'll have the stream branding and stuff like that. I'm debating using like a green screen that I've got behind me, so like it hides all this other stuff. So it'll like if you join the stream, like if you hang it on the stream and everything looks completely different, that's why, because it's just going to be me live coding for work stuff. What kind of company do I work for? So Van Radius asking in chat. So I work for a company called Stream, and the website is getstream.io. And it's an API company. We're a software as a service company. And basically the APIs that we build allow other people to add live chat and activity feeds into their applications. So if you want to make something like an Instagram, where you've just got like a news feed or like a Twitter news feed, lots of different kinds of activity feeds that you can do. Some of them are based on like how much people interact with them, and some of them are just chronological order. And so we've got the activity feed, and then we've got the live chat component, which is exactly what you would think of. It's just a live chat, and there's like moderation tools and things like that involved in there. So that's the company that I work for. And primarily my role at Stream is developer education. So I do a lot of onboarding and stuff like that, or at least the plan is. And so I help engineers identify like, okay, well, during the interview process, what did we feel you knew well, and what did we feel you didn't know well? So in your first week or two on the job, these are the topics that we want you to kind of study up on. And then my job then is to curate, how do I go find that content for them? And then how do I facilitate just within the company, people sharing knowledge with one another? And so got some stuff out there for like doing like little lunch and learn kinds of things of, where, engineers on the team can come hang out. One person's going to share a topic about their area of expertise within the company. So that if someone else gets hired and they've got a question about that, they know who to go ask. And then we'll have a whole bank of those videos kind of stored up that people can go back and watch and stuff like that. So yeah, it'll be pretty fun. So Van Radius says, I'm wondering what kind of clients use that. Just curious, since I don't understand the use. So there are, I need to look this up because I have to make sure that I don't say customer names that I'm not allowed to say on a live broadcast. So let me go find our list of logos of who uses us. Case studies. Let's see. CodePen uses us. Bands in Town, if you know Bands in Town, they use our stuff. Crunchbase, if you use Crunchbase, they do a lot of business analytics and stuff like that. There are some fitness apps that use us that I don't think I can name them, so I'm not even going to try to name like who I think I'm allowed to say or who I'm not allowed to say. But if you log into a fitness app where it's like, so-and-so is doing this workout and so-and-so is doing that workout, or so-and-so went on a bike ride or whatever, all of that stuff may be powered by our activity feed. And so as you log in and say, I'm going for a run, it like broadcasts that out to other people who are interested in that kind of topic. Or if there's like a live chat component of, while you're doing the workout, you can do like a live chat and things like that. Those companies use our software to power all of that stuff. Cool. So yeah, so watch for that live coding if you're interested in Go programming and TDD and stuff like that, kind of as we go. Yeah, Adobe and SoundCloud. Yep. So lots of logos on our site of who uses us. I was just kind of browsing through some of the case studies that we had published as well, like Dub Smash, Sport Lobster. Bands in Town was like one of the early adopters of our newsfeed stuff. So yeah, we got a lot of cool people using our stuff. I'm just not as up to speed on who I'm allowed to talk about or not. So I can't mention some of the really cool names that I know use our software. It says messaging and activity feeds. Yeah, so it's like chat messaging and then the activity feed kind of stuff. Now you can use the activity feed as like an inbox kind of thing as well. But we also do a live chat component. So you can do like, live chat and then like interact with people's chat messages and so on. Cool. So that's pretty much it. So as far as the announcements go, this stream is staying exactly the same, Thursdays and Sundays. But I'm going to be doing more streaming during the day where I'm doing live coding. And then the email series is splitting from 1 list into 4. And I should have all of that stuff finished written by the end of November, including all the publishing side of like, people can then sign up and get those lists. Now, if you're currently subscribed, you can stay subscribed. And it'll just kind of like keep sending those messages out over time. But then when the other ones launch, I'll probably blast an email out to everybody that's subscribed saying, hey, if you want to switch over to these other ones, just go subscribe to those and then unsubscribe from this one. Or I'll figure out some way of like deleting them or porting everybody over to like a new setup or something like that. So yeah, so those, as far as the announcements go and stuff like that, that's what's going to be affecting the stream over the next little while. So cool, let's dive in on some Q&A. So per usual, I've got like a huge list of questions. As I answer them on the stream, I got lots of people sending me even more messages, which is great. So you can send me messages on LinkedIn. You can send me messages on Twitter. What are some other ways? I'm in a handful of Slack communities, like Virtual Coffee and Denver Devs. What are some other, I shut down Slack for bandwidth and CPU usage reasons. Yeah, I'm in a whole handful of different Slack communities to help people out. And so if I'm in a Slack community and you see like Eddie and Douglas or Eddie and Douglas 736, reach out. It'll like I try to use the same profile picture everywhere. So it's either just me in a black t-shirt without the beard, or it'll be me with the beard in a gray sweater with Riker as a puppy. So if you see either of those two pictures, that's probably me. Just send me your question. LinkedIn, though, is probably the number one way to connect with me. So you can send me messages on LinkedIn or over Twitter DM, because my Twitter DMs are always open. So you don't have to even follow me on Twitter to send me a message. You can just send me a message with questions, and I'll either answer it over the DM or I'll address it here on the stream as well. So sometimes I answer them to the person privately, and then I ask the question here. And then the other thing that I want to sort of reiterate with that is when you ask me a question privately over LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that, I don't say on the stream like, oh, Joe sent me this question. So I'm not ever going to give out your name. So don't worry about asking questions. They will always be sort of presented anonymously. And then what I do, I've got some scripts written up, and this is the other live coding thing that I'm probably going to do in the evenings as well, and all this free time I have, is I've got these Python scripts written up that I can basically take, like tonight's video, it's going to be this really long MP4 video, And I basically go back and I watch it and I mark all these timestamps of when I asked a certain question and my answer, kind of a start and stop time. And then I write out some notes for that. And then I have some Python scripts then that actually go and it runs this utility called FFmpeg that basically then splits the video into a whole bunch of shorter videos. And then for the sake of YouTube, there's like a little intro video and a little outro video, as we call it. And it kind of attaches that on either end of the main sort of content. And it puts all that together as one video, and it makes a little thumbnail. And then I can go just drop all those on YouTube, and I just go in and manually schedule those. And then I do the same thing where with the same timestamps, I go through and I extract just the audio, and that becomes my podcast. And so if you've checked out the podcast, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify. I think it's up on Pandora now as well. Or you can go to Podbean and just search for TechInterview.Guide podcast, and you'll find it from there. But if you do find the podcast, give it a thumbs up, give it a follow, listen to several episodes, and then like leave a comment or something on those different platforms like Google and Apple and so on, so other people can find them as well. And so I extract the same time slot, but instead of extracting out the video, it actually just pulls the audio out of the video for that time frame. And then it does the same kind of thing of like it attaches a little intro and a little outro of like, hi, I'm Ian, I wrote the website, blah blah blah. And then the outro is like, hey, if you found that helpful, like connect with me on LinkedIn and ask questions and so on. And then now I've got this collection of MP3 files that I then upload to Podbean. And so the last live coding thing that I want to get into is actually showing how I'm going to write an app for myself to go in and just put all this stuff in a database and let like a timed thing probably running on this computer up here behind me that's sort of powering the monitor. Right, this little gray box right here is just a little tiny Linux machine. I'm probably just going to like host the database on that, put all the information in there, plus the MP3s and MP4 files and so on, and just let that thing like upload them for me. That's kind of my ideal automation at this point, is I want to just, go in, mark all those timestamps, write up my notes, and then just have my scripts like just go blast everything and then upload everything and schedule like when they're going to go live and stuff like that on Podbean and YouTube and so on. So I don't have to like manually go in and upload all that stuff. And so I may live code how I build out that application as well. Haven't fully decided on that one yet because I'm not sure what tech stack I want to use. I don't know if I want to go learn a new tech stack in order to build that, or if I just want to like get it out and get it done and just do it in Rails or something really quick and simple to get it out. Not sure, but we'll see how it goes. So basically the rest of the stream tonight is just going through Q&A and just answering some of these questions that people have submitted and kind of share my thoughts. I've written up notes for some of them. Probably get through, I don't know, maybe 10 or so questions, but for those hanging out in chat, because we picked up a couple of viewers along the way here, if you've got questions about interview prep, career prep, getting a job in the tech industry, whether you're new in the industry or getting ready to get into the industry, or whether you've been in the industry for a long time, I'm just here to share my thoughts and perspectives. Doesn't necessarily mean that I've got all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do have a lot of perspective. I've been in the industry for 25 plus years, so I've seen some things. Cue the PTSD, stare off in the distance kind of meme, but I've been around the block on a lot of things. I've worked at a lot of different kinds of companies, a lot of different industries. I've been a hiring manager, and so I've got a lot of perspectives and ideas on why the interview process sucks and how we can change that interview process and make it better. But I also want to share like my ideas about how to do networking, how to reach out to people, to ask them specific questions about companies as you're doing your research, how to build resumes, how to build cover letters, all kind of stuff. So if you have questions, please drop them in chat, and I'll totally address those as I'm answering some of these other questions as we go. I like to interject, your questions into the stream at the same time. So if you've got comments, if you want to help each other out in chat, if you see a question come by and you have a perspective or you have an idea, please share them. My whole catchphrase for this stream is share what you know and we all win. So I want to make sure that we can be respectful of each other's time and just be super helpful for one another. So, all right, well let's dive in, or get some questions going here. So. All right. Just going to take a little drink break here. So Van Radius, you mentioned you're out on the East Coast. Are you in development work now? Like, are you a dev? Are you in the tech industry? Are you thinking about getting into it? Tell me a little bit more about your background. All right, while we're waiting on that. Yeah, so I'm going to go through, I've got a handful of questions. I'm going to try to get them up on the screen right below my picture here as well, so that that'll be written out as well. Cool, you are a software engineer. Cool, awesome. Always love to meet new developers and so on. Curious as well how you heard about the stream and how you came to drop by and hang out with us tonight. So 6 years experience, cool. Very cool. I got about 4 years experience working in Canada. So I'm originally from Canada, went to college up there, studied computer engineering, which is a lot of firmware development, and then moved down to California in 2000 and been in the States ever since. So by the time I had 6 years experience, I was in California for 2 years. Actively interviewing. Very good. Cool. Well, yeah, if you've got questions about the whole interview process, or, questions about, like, I'm getting this far through the process and then I don't get phone calls back, or what do you think about this kind of interview question, or I got asked this kind of behavioral question, what do you think? Always happy to kind of share perspectives from a hiring manager's point of view, but also from an engineering point of view of, as an engineer, if I got that question, here's how I would answer it. So if you've got anything like that you want to drop in chat, please do so. Follow me since I first rated Simon. Awesome. It was cool to see that Simon's taking a break. So Midnight Simon, he did leak code for like 150 days straight and went and interviewed at Google, I believe, if I got that right. And so he's waiting to hear back from them about next steps and stuff, and thought he would just take a break. So I missed his stream the other night where he said he was taking a break, but I watched a portion of that stream today just to kind of get caught up on Simon and how he's doing. So it's good to see that he's taking a break. You got to rest your brain too. You can't just go full tilt for that long and not take a break. So good deal. Good to have you on the stream. All right, well, let's get into some Q&A here. All right, let me copy the question over on the screen here as well. All right, this first question is a good one. Should I focus on fewer things in my job, like be a specialist in something, or should I be a generalist but not do any one thing extremely well? Not as a cop-out, but the answer is kind of, it depends. It depends a lot on where you want to take your career. It depends on what kind of work you want to do, whether it's like web development or just front-end development, or maybe application development like desktop apps and things like that, or mobile apps. Really depends on the kinds of things that you want to do in your career and where you want to take your career. It's up to you. You get to choose the path that your career takes. So trying to figure out if you want to specialize in one particular area or generalize and be decent at a lot of things will really depend on the kinds of skills that you want to build up as a developer. If you're early in your career, you may not know where you want to go, and that's okay. And so your first couple of jobs may look like you're kind of hopping around and you're not really sure what you want to do, and that's fine. Everybody that looks at someone with only a couple of years experience, we kind of expect to see that on your resume, like, oh, you tried this sort of industry, and then you jump to this kind of industry, and then you jump to this kind of industry, and now we see a trend of, okay, you've kind of settled on e-commerce, and so we see you now like kind of going down that path, or you've had several jobs in e-commerce. So we would look at that and go, okay, well, either you've got an interest in that, or you feel like that's sort of where you're finding your strength, or you're comfortable in working in that sort of domain while you may be learning other things. So early in your career, you may not know. That's okay. I would say a lot of companies love what we call a T-shaped engineer. So if you imagine the actual letter T, and you kind of think how the top of the T kind of represents breadth of knowledge, like you know a lot of things, but the length of the bar of the T is kind of the depth on maybe fewer things. And so you might be really good at, databases, and you know a little bit about a lot of other things. You know a little bit of front end and a little bit of back end, and you know a little bit about this framework, and you know a little bit about test-driven development, and you know GitHub workflows, and you know a little bit about Docker and deployments, and maybe like a CI, continuous integration type of platform like Travis CI or Circle CI or something like that. But you know databases really well. Like you really went deep on like Postgres or MySQL or MongoDB or Firebase or something like that, and you know that database system inside and out. That's what we call a T-shape engineer. So you've got this breadth of knowledge, but you went really deep on one other particular thing. Companies love that kind of stuff, because that will then allow you to be adaptable to work on a lot of different things. And that's kind of how I've shaped my career to some extent. I've learned kind of a wide breadth of knowledge, but I've gone deep on fewer areas. And so there are some topics that I know really well and some topics that I don't know very well. Like I barely know anything about Docker, and I don't know all that much about AWS, but that's okay because I know a lot of, good programming languages that are in common use. I've got a good handle on design patterns. I've got a good handle on, good object-oriented programming practices, things like that. And so those are the things I've gone deep on, as well as SQL. I've done DBA duties, so like managing database replication and things like that. I've done that stuff really well. And so I've gone really, really deep on those areas of knowledge. And so working at companies like startups, it makes me a very versatile employee because I can fill a lot of gaps. It's rare to find people that have a lot of depth in a lot of areas. But as a hiring manager, I want to make sure that the people on my team, that sort of that vertical bar of their strength of things that they've gone really deep on, that all the different people on my team don't have that same vertical bar, like everybody's good at databases. I mean, maybe that's important to some degree, but I want to make sure I've got like one person that's really good about databases, another person that's really good about Docker, another one that's really good at testing, another one that's really good at, integrating front-end stuff. I want to make sure that I've got people with lots of these verticals, but also similar breadth of knowledge so that you can kind of fill the gap. If someone needs to take a day off, you can kind of get by a little bit on Docker. Or, maybe our database person needs to take a vacation, or they've planned some time off or something, and I've got other people on the team that can kind of fill in a little bit. And then as your manager, then my job is to figure out, okay, well, how do I get all of you talking to share your knowledge so that gradually, like, you pick up a little bit more of that vertical depth for some of those other topics. But I want to make sure that, those vertical topics don't necessarily all overlap. Like everybody's just really good at all the same things. I need to make sure that there are lots of verticals to kind of cover all of the different depths of things that I need on my team. So, if I only hire people that know, all these different programming languages and frameworks to a shallow degree, and everybody knows Docker really well, then the whole team's going to suffer if I need someone with database knowledge or testing knowledge or things like that. So is it better to be a specialist? Well, the specialist is like a really deep, like a really tall vertical bar in a particular area. Like, absolutely everything about Python. Like if I got a question about Python, I'm coming to you no matter what. Python like incredibly well, or React extremely well. Absolutely everything there is to know about React, or whatever technology. Pick a technology, and it's up to you if you want to go super deep on that. But I think it's also important that you have some amount of breadth of knowledge. Now, the caution that I typically share on the stream is early in your career, you don't want to go too wide on your breadth of knowledge, because going really wide on your breadth of knowledge, you're not going to gain, like you won't have enough time to gain that depth of knowledge that you're going to need in a particular area to really stand out. And so trying to apply for a job, you're going to say, well, I know like 16 different programming languages and, 18 different frameworks, and I know, all these other libraries and tools, but you're not going to know any of them particularly deep when we talk about kind of that vertical depth of that T-shape, that bar that kind of goes up and down. You don't know anything particularly deep. And so then it's like, okay, well, you've got all the same shallow skills as everybody else, but if you don't have something kind of deep, that you're going to help improve the team in some way or make the team better in some way, then you're less desirable as a candidate. And so I think that that's something to be careful of early in your career. Now, that's not to say you can't pick up a lot of new skills as a new developer, but I think it's something to be careful about and be cautious about, that early in your career, you generally want to try to stay away from too much breadth of knowledge and go deep on at least a couple of things. Like if you're in Ruby on Rails, like learn everything you can about Ruby and Rails and like that whole ecosystem. Learn that really deep if you can, because then the deeper that you know something, the easier it's going to be to transition that knowledge to something else. Like Rails is an MVC design pattern framework. And so if you understand how MVC works in Rails, you're going to be able to apply some of that knowledge if you then switch over to, say, C#.NET, or you switch over to Django. Python and Django. Django's kind of MVC. Yeah, it's mostly MVC. You'll be able to apply a lot of the knowledge of like, how do I break my code out in certain ways? How do I abstract my code and encapsulate my code and practice these other good design patterns as part of the MVC design pattern to implement my code in a particular way. So the deeper you go on something, the easier you're going to be able to transfer that knowledge into a similar skill. And now you've gone extra deep on that thing. But if you only learn kind of that surface level, like all I've done is a to-do list kind of app, then that's all you're going to be able to transfer over to some other technology. You know, if you do a to-do list in React and then you're like, okay, cool, I know React. Now I'm going to go learn Angular. Well, the only thing you're going to be able to build in Angular is another to-do list app, because that's all you've built in React. And so the transferable knowledge won't be as deep. So early in your career, go really deep on like one or two things. And then, you know, once you feel you've gone deep enough, then you can start to kind of work on the breadth of knowledge. That would be my advice for early in your career. Now, as you shape your career, kind of going back to this whole idea of, do you want to be a specialist or a generalist? Again, it depends a little bit on what you want to do with your career. I've always wanted to be a generalist. I shouldn't say always. Fresh out of college, I wanted to be a specialist. I wanted to really get into like network drivers and learn absolutely everything about networking. And then I ended up just generalizing. And I had way more fun with that because I was able to fill a lot of gaps. And so I became a really ideal employee for startups, because at a startup, you have to wear a lot of hats. You have to get involved in a lot of different kinds of work. And it turned out I was a very desirable type of employee in that ecosystem, because they need people that can do a little bit of everything. You may not be amazing at any one thing, but the depth of knowledge that you do bring in a couple of areas are going to be extremely helpful. But then you've also got that breadth of knowledge that make you a very versatile employee. So a couple of things to think about there. Cool, catching up on chat a little bit. Van Radius says, I'm in a lot of team matching phases and final feedback phase. Awesome, good for you. So expecting offers in a couple of weeks. That's always fun. It's a good way to spend the holiday season, is juggling job offers. Got Jen Develops in the chat. Jen can tell you all about juggling job offers. We did an interview with Jen on the stream a couple of weeks back, and she regaled us with the story of applying and not getting any hits, and then making a couple of online profiles, and suddenly people were finding her and literally throwing job offers her way. So she did a great job navigating that and started a new job a couple of weeks ago. So cool, good to see you, Jen. This next question was a really interesting one. Someone was asked in an interview, why should we not hire you? This one is it's very similar to kind of that common question of, what are your weaknesses? Or tell me like your biggest weakness or your biggest area of growth. Really, the theme of this question comes down to awareness. Like, what is your self-awareness of what are you good at? What are you not good at? Or what have you recognized in yourself that you need to work on? Some people have a bit of a blind spot, even when it comes to their own weaknesses. Like, they don't know what they're not good at, or no one has ever really, given them criticism on, hey, these things you did really well, but this area of your work, you need to do better. And so some people just don't have that good awareness, or you'll kind of see some conflicting advice online where it's like, oh, turn that weakness into a strength, and, don't spend a lot of time focusing on the negative, but like spin it into a positive. And There are benefits to that, but it starts to sound really cliche, like, oh, my biggest weakness is I work too hard and I work too many hours. And, you want to make it sound like you're just this real go-getter and you're going to put in all the effort possible, humanly possible. That just starts to sound cliche and very ungenuine at some point. And I think it's important to have self-awareness over, like, what are you really not good at? How did you recognize it? How did you work to overcome it? And then how are you being held accountable to not continue that behavior? That's really what I'm trying to ask when I ask these kinds of questions. Like, what are your greatest weaknesses? I really want to know that A, you've identified some kind of growth area, or that it was identified for you and brought to your attention. Some people are just unaware that they behave in certain ways. And so how did it get identified, and then how did you improve it? Like, what steps have you taken to not do that anymore? And then how are you being held accountable, or how are you holding yourself accountable to not repeat those things? And one story that I've shared on the stream before is, like, I used to show up late to meetings all the time. I'm just like, oh, the meeting room's like 20 feet over there. It's no big deal. Like, a minute before the meeting starts, I'm just going to just walk in the room and sit down and I'll be good to go. But then it's a minute to the meeting and I start to walk and go, oh, shoot, I need to get my notebook. And so I turn around, I grab my notebook and, oh, shoot, I forgot a pen. Let me grab a pen. Well, maybe I should bring my laptop. And you know what? I'm kind of thirsty. Maybe I'll, grab a drink, or I'll grab a water bottle or something like that. Next thing I know, it's like several minutes later and I walk into the meeting late. And so through my own, kind of sense of seeing this thing and people being kind of annoyed that I'm walking in late, as well as like just management feedback of like, hey, it'd be cool if you could like show up ready to go when the meeting's ready to start and not like walk in as people are like getting things rolling, because it's disruptive and so on. And so talking about, okay, well, this was identified partly by me and partly by others. And now here's how I'm, holding myself accountable to not do that. Now I set timers like 5 minutes ahead of time. And in that calendar event, I'm going to start listing out all the things I need to bring to that meeting. And then I'm going to show up a couple of minutes early because I'm going to have all that stuff ready to go, and I'm going to show up early and I'll be good to go. That's really what it's asking. Now, this particular person got asked in an interview, why should we not hire you? That's a really bad interview question. It's a very, what I would call like a loaded question. It's a very loaded question, and it's extremely negative. It's focusing a ton on the negative because they want you to tell them why they shouldn't move forward in the interview process with you. By the time I'm interviewing you, I'm looking for a reason to say, yes, I want to hire you. So why in the world would I ask a question like this? I would say if a company ever asks you this question, it shows that they're trying to put a very negative spin on something, and you would probably want to avoid that company because they're not being very genuine about the kinds of questions that they're asking to get true kinds of like awareness and very well thought out kinds of answers. Sometimes they do it for a little bit of the shock value of like, oh, let's catch them off guard with this question. But it's a really lousy thing to do to somebody in an interview. It's to me, that would be a sign of disrespect. And that would be one of the first signals of, I don't want to work here. Now, does that mean I would completely shut down the interview and walk out? No, I would still I would finish the interview, but then I would probably give the company feedback later on, like, hey, by the way, that question really didn't sit well. I think it's pretty loaded and it brings a lot of negative conversation, where I'm here at the interview trying to convince you why you should hire me and how I'm going to help you. And to make me start listing reasons why you should not hire me is like the complete opposite of what the interview is supposed to be about. So I think if you get asked that kind of question, I would say that that's definitely a flag, and hopefully giving you a little bit of insight from a hiring manager perspective will help you understand a little bit of why that question is like a really lousy kind of interview question. Seeing in chat, Van Radius says, if somebody says that, I'd probably want to say someone efficient and not someone who works too hard. Oh, that was related to, turning a weakness into a strength. And Van Radius also says, I wouldn't like to answer that question as an interviewee and feel offended by it. Yeah, I agree. I would simply discard that company as a potential employer. Yep. And yeah, I've got a lot of the same feelings on that. I think it's a sign of disrespect if they're bringing, very biased questions like that. Then it's a sign that you probably don't want to work there. Because in an interview scenario, they're trying to win you over. They're trying to show you why you want to work there. Like it's a two-way thing. You're there evaluating them every bit as much as they're evaluating you. And I think if they start throwing these kinds of questions at you, then they're not putting their best self forward. And I think it can kind of give you a bit of a glimpse into, maybe what the company dynamic is like. And yeah, I would be right there with Van Radius. I wouldn't be real keen to work for a company like that. Hard Bender says in chat, I was sitting here trying to answer that, but as time went by, my stomach started to churn. That's exactly right. I think that those kinds of questions just don't belong in an interview. Yeah, thanks for your thoughts, everybody. Would it be appropriate to just answer why they should? I think in that scenario, though, I think you can still bring some of the awareness of your growth areas and things that you want to learn. But would I bring up, well, your job post asked for this particular skill and I don't have that skill, but I've got these other skills. Then you're kind of saying, you're kind of already playing the game that you've mentally gone through on whether you even apply for the job of I know I don't meet all the qualifications. I was looking at a job post recently from Microsoft, and they're like, you must have 2 years of PowerShell experience and then all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I wouldn't have that skill. And so if they were to ask me this question, because part of what I do when I prepare all these questions and answers as I go look for job posts and try to think of, if I was at Microsoft and they asked me that question, how would I answer it? And so thinking of things like, okay, well, why should we not hire you? I could say, well, I don't have 2 years of PowerShell experience. I have very limited PowerShell experience. I know what it is. It's going to be very similar to Bash, which I have a lot of experience in, but I don't specifically have this one skill that you're looking for. Well, it's putting a spotlight on this area of weakness, and that's something that you generally want to avoid in an interview. And so if they're asking you to specifically put spotlight on something like that in a negative sort of fashion, then again, it's very, it's like the antithesis of what the interview is supposed to be about. You're supposed to be there trying to tell them how you are going to help the company and what benefit they're going to gain by hiring you. It's not meant for you to show them, why they shouldn't hire you. All right, we'll move on from there. Nick T, good to see you. Thanks for the chat this week. I appreciate your time. I had a good call with Nick the other morning. It's always good to catch up with folks online. Next question. I was asked on a phone screen to walk me through your resume. Are they being lazy, or what are they really looking for here? This was actually a good question, and it did make me chuckle a little bit, especially about the whole, are they just being lazy? Did they even read my resume? They've scanned it, they've screened it, they've kind of done that 10 second to 30 second sort of pass over the resume and go, yep, I'm going to call Nick and get Nick on the phone. But I guarantee they probably have not read every word on that page. And while they're asking this question and you're kind of recapping things for them, they're probably adding additional notes to some sort of profile in their system, probably in their applicant tracking system, ATS, about the kinds of things that you're saying. So they're probably taking notes while you're sharing things. What I would recommend is don't read it top to bottom. They're not asking you to read the resume to them. They're just asking you hey, the resume is already a summary of you. Now summarize that even more. It's really just the whole theme of tell me about yourself. But they're asking specifically about what's on the resume. So the typical kinds of advice that I would give would be explain how your skills are going to help the company. Or look at some of the other writings and podcast stuff that I've done about the whole tell me about yourself, the daily email series and so on. But everything that you share really needs to kind of answer that question of this is why I'm a great candidate. This is why you should hire me. This is why we're both headed in the same direction. There's got to be a lot of good alignment. Here's how I'm going to help the team. Here's how I'm going to make your job easier. So as you're recapping the things on the resume, you can say, yeah, I specifically put this project on here because it shows a lot of alignment with what the company does. And so I wanted to make sure to really point out and highlight that particular project because you're very team focused, and this was a group project, and it showed a lot of my collaboration skills. And so I'm not necessarily reading off, oh, I made a project that was like a fake e-commerce platform and I worked on it with 4 other people over 3 weeks, and it was Rails and React, and we did test-driven development. Like, I'm not literally reading point for point what's on the resume, but I can kind of explain, this is why I put this particular stuff on the resume to give you this particular resume. Again, this really sort of brings back all the advice that I give around writing a customized resume for a company, because then it helps answer this kind of question of, like, walk me through your resume. You can explain why you thought these were the best qualities to show about yourself on that resume for them. And you could say, yeah, as I was customizing this resume for you, they're like, oh, they customized your resume for us? That's awesome. Now they're like extra interested into why you chose these things to tell them. And so that's really what they're asking. So it's a hint of tell me about yourself, but I think it's a good way to really show this is why I took the time to make you a custom resume for this job, and really go through and highlight those points of why they should be hiring you and why they're interviewing you in the first place. All right, next up on the list. What are some good things to research or prepare before a phone screen? So there are a lot of different steps and sort of stages in the interview process in the tech industry. And typically when you apply for a job, you're going to get some kind of email from the company saying, like, hey, we checked out your application, everything looks good. Go ahead and like use this link to like schedule a call with me, or I'd like to schedule a call with you. What's your availability going to be like? And they will actually want to get you on a call, or maybe on a Zoom or Google Meet or something like that, where they can actually like interact with you a little bit. And then from there, it will progress on to like the technical interviews and maybe like a take-home assignment or maybe some sort of technical assessment, just to show that you have the technical skill that they're looking for. And then like maybe other deeper types of interviews, and then like culture fit and all those kinds of things. And then hopefully turn that into an offer. This particular question is asking, what are some good things to research before the phone screen? I would say if it's the very first phone screen, you're probably going to be talking to a recruiter or somebody in like human resources or people operations or talent, like whatever they call that team of people, some sort of recruiter within the company. You're going to be talking to someone who's in charge of the people within the company, not necessarily the technology side of things. Unless it's a small startup, then you might actually be talking to the hiring manager on that first call. But I would say there are a handful of things that you want to practice and have ready for that phone call. So first and foremost, you want to practice describing what your current role is at your job, and also why you're thinking of leaving. Like, what is it about this particular job that's drawing you to that company? Now, you want to be careful not to speak negatively about the company that you're at and why you're thinking of leaving. You don't want to put a lot of emphasis on to like, oh, my manager's full of hot air and takes credit for everything I do. Even if that's true, you don't want to bring that up in a phone screen. In fact, you don't want to bring that up at any point during the interview. What you want to say is, I saw this job post from your company and it really sparked something in me. And I realized that that's the direction I want to take my career. I've already been practicing some of these skills and we're both like kind of headed in that same direction. This is going to be like a great partnership to work together. And so you don't necessarily want to talk about the reasons why you want to leave. You want to talk about the reasons about why you want to join. So describing what you currently do or whatever that background is and why you want to join the company, that would be the first thing to practice. The next thing to practice is kind of what you want in that next role and the kinds of things that you're bringing to the company. So what are the sort of key skills and features? How are you going to help them? How are you going to make their job easier? What are you bringing to them? In that first phone screen, they may also get into questions like, when are you available to start? Like, if we were to make you an offer, how far away would you want to start that job? Like, it's already early November when we're recording this. let's say that, we make you an offer by the end of November. When do you want to start? Do you want to start, right before the holidays? Do you want to wait until January? Like, what would your ideal start date be? And sometimes these first phone screens will also start that ball rolling of like, what's your salary expectation? And I've got other recordings on how you can kind of dodge that question for the time being. You can say, you know what, I'd really like to get through the interview process before addressing that. Or I've got a number in mind. What kinds of, salary range is the company willing to offer for the role? And flip it back on them right away and try to get them to say a number first. And I've got a whole video that you can watch about that, or podcast audio that you can go find on how to kind of avoid that question without sounding like a jerk. But I would be prepared to talk about those kinds of things. So when would you want to start, and what would that salary expectation be? And be practiced about how to kind of dodge the second question, but, have an ideal start date. I want to give my employer a month of notice, or, I really want to wrap things up because we've got a quarterly goal. And so, as soon as Q4 is done, I could start in January, just so they've got some kind of idea of we really want to have somebody start next week, and you don't want to start until January. That's like a month and a half away. Maybe let's resume the conversation in January then, and let's see, if we still have an opening or something then. So they may delay a little bit if you need to push that out a little bit farther. So just keep those things in mind. And then the last thing I would probably prepare is have just one or two questions for them. And specifically, one of those questions would be, ask them about the whole interview process. Just out of curiosity, what all the different steps of your interview process are. Do you do a take-home assignment? Do you do live coding? Is it the Leak Code style challenge? Is it something more customized? What kinds of things should I be studying? Can you share some of that information with me? And you can kind of present that as quickly as I've just done it now. You don't have to go into a ton of detail and ask 15 different questions about it. You can just say, hey, I'm curious about the interview process and what all the different steps would be going forward. But you should have at least one or two questions ready for them. At each stage of the interview, you can ask more and more questions. But on the initial phone screen, when they say hey, have you got any questions? You don't want to bombard them with 50 questions, because they're not going to have that kind of time. And I've addressed this on the stream too. If they get to a point where they want you to ask them questions, they probably only have time for you to ask one or two questions at that point. As you kind of progress through the interview, you're going to learn more about the company. You're going to learn more about things that they do and the projects that they're working on. And now you can start asking more and more specific questions. And then by the time you get into those late stage interviews, where they're doing culture and, company background and all that kind of stuff, now you can get into really nitty gritty. Hey, tell me about your deployment process. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Why haven't you changed what you don't like about it? If there's something that you don't like who's got the authority to make that kind of change? Or how do you talk about those kinds of changes as a team? Or is it just impossible to change that deployment process because of the platform that you use? And what was the thinking behind choosing that platform if the deployment is garbage? You can start asking more pointed questions and ask for a lot more detail in those questions as you progress through the interview process. But in the initial phone screen, you probably just want to ask one or two questions. And I would say go for two questions, where one of them is tell me about your interview process. Give me the whole thing, and then what would you like me to study and be really well prepared to present as part of the interview process? Do you have any kind of guide written up? I think that would make one of the really good questions. And then from there, you can ask other background kinds of questions about the company. But in that initial phone screen, or any other stage, you don't want to ask questions so what does your company do? You don't want to ask those kinds of things. You could also ask, hey, as part of the interview process, would it be possible to get a list of the people that will be interviewing me? I think that it's a really good step to do a tiny bit of research on the people that are actually going to be spending time interviewing you, so that you can find out a little bit about their background. If you find out about their work history and their education and so on, it might give you some indication about the kinds of questions that they may ask you. If they come from a PhD in computer science, they're probably going to ask you some pretty hard CS questions, because that's their background and that's stuff that they know. It's not guaranteed that that'll happen, but if they've worked at, big FANG companies and they've got a master's in computer science and stuff like that, they're probably going to rely on those kinds of questions. And if you get a list of the people that are interviewing you and you spot that, then you can always reach out to the recruiter and say like, hey, I'm a little bit curious about the kinds of questions that get asked. Like me personally, for example, I studied computer engineering, which is a lot of low level, like how does the CPU actually work in the computer? But we didn't learn like, what's a heap and things like that. And so if I get an interview question, tell me how you would do such and such and find the nth, minimum answers out of this thing. I know that's a heap problem, but I'm going to really struggle through it because I've never really used a heap any time in my career. But I know that it's something I'm going to have to study if I were to go do a job hunt for a development kind of job, because those are the kinds of questions that I'm going to get asked. So I could present to the interviewer and just say like, hey, I don't have a CS background, so I'm kind of curious, like, are you going to ask like really deep computer science specific kinds of questions, or are you going to rely more on questions about my background? You can ask them some of those questions once you know who's interviewing you and you do a bit of background. So that would be probably the two questions that I would ask on that phone screen is tell me about your process. And if possible, could you tell me who I would be interviewing with at the different stages? Because I like to do some research, so I've got specific questions to ask them about their background and why they work at the company and how like some of their previous jobs helped them in this role and what kinds of things did they learn at those jobs that they find really helpful at this role. Things like that. You can kind of present it that way. All right, let's move on from here. Take a little drink break here in a sec. It's funny, I work from home all day and I don't always talk very much. And so I get on the live stream and like an hour in, my voice starts feeling a little raspy already. All right, we'll get through probably a couple of more here, but yeah, as always, if you've got questions, please drop them in chat. I'm happy to take questions from chat as well and kind of roll those into the Q&A as well. Why would a company not allow applicants to ask questions during a job interview? Is it a good or bad idea to ask questions to the interviewer? So this kind of piggybacks on the previous question of, what's the phone screen going to be like, or what should you prepare? And you should always prepare to have questions for them. So the second part of the question, is it a good or bad idea to have questions to ask them? Yeah, it's a good idea. It shows that you've done some due diligence. We did an interview on the stream, a little over a month ago. We had Lee Gonzalez from Guild Education on here. And like the main theme that came out of talking with Lee is like, you got to be prepared. When you go to these interviews, you got to be prepared. You got to have things ready to go. You've got to practice your answers. You can't just show up and wing it. That's not going to go well. Like you've got to put some thought into this. It shows that you're, again, like we talked earlier on the stream about this whole idea of respect. If you just show up and you're just kind of winging it and I can tell that you haven't practiced a particular answer, or you haven't thought about a particular kind of behavior question that may be kind of a common themed question that you're going to get asked. If I get the sense that you haven't prepared an answer for that kind of question, that tells me that you're not respecting my time and my process. So that respect thing kind of goes both ways. So yes, you should always have questions. This particular question started though, like, why would a company not allow an applicant to ask questions during an interview? And I had some thoughts that I wanted to share on that. I would say having questions prepared so that if the interviewer does say like, hey, do you have any questions for me, that you have some things that you can ask. There are questions kind of throughout the process that are more appropriate to ask, at different points of the interview. Like early on in that phone screen, for example, you wouldn't ask a question like, yeah, what's the PD budget? Like if I get hired, how much budget do I have to go to like tech conferences and stuff? Because remember, in the initial interviews, you're trying to sell them on like what you bring to the company, not what you want from the company. What you want from the company, those can come later on. My main thought here, though, like would a company ever not allow you to ask questions? I think can kind of go one of two ways. Like if you say, hey, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And they say no, then that's kind of, again, that's a sign of disrespect if they're not making that time available. But the caveat here is if I've got like a 1 hour block, and I'm just going to pick on Nick in chat just for the heck of it. If I'm interviewing Nick and I've got a 1 hour slot, and we spend the first couple of minutes where I'm kind of like, hey, tell me a little bit about your background so I can, work through these technical challenges with you. And then, cool, here's a technical challenge that I want to work through. If I'm not careful about watching the time that you're spending working on that, I need to make sure that, we're spending probably 30 to 40 minutes on that code so that I can maybe give you some thoughts and some ideas around like how to improve that code, or what I thought about the quality of what you did, if I've got time and ability to give you that little bit of feedback. And then I want to make sure that I've got time for discussion and questions and things at the end. But if I'm not keeping track of time, it's like, oh shoot, we've only got like 5 minutes left, and then I've got to leave because somebody else is coming in. I don't want to say like, hey, do you have any questions for me? Because we're kind of out of time. Like I've only got like 30 seconds to answer a question. Well, it might take you 10 or 15 seconds to even ask the question, and I don't want to walk out and go, yeah, I don't really have a good answer, or the answer to that's going to take too long. That's not a good feeling as an interviewer. And so as an interviewer, I need to make sure that I'm paying attention to how much time is being spent. And if I lose track of time, or if something that you do takes a really long time, it could be that we've run out of time and there just is no time for you to ask me questions. That would typically only happen, though, I think, at a stage where, the conversation has gone on quite long, or something that you've done has gone over the sort of what would be an allotted amount of time. But if the company is actively barring you and stopping you from asking questions, like if you say like, hey, have you got a minute, for me to ask you some questions? If they say, you know what, we ran out of time, why don't you email me those questions or something like that. But if they're just like, no, I don't really want to answer any questions, and they just get up and leave, then that's a sign of disrespect. And again, you're there to evaluate them just as much. And if you're like, that Nick guy's kind of a jerk, he didn't even want to let me ask questions. By the way, Nick's not a jerk. Nick's a very generous guy with his time, and appreciate watching Nick's live stream as well. So go follow Nick. Not right now. Stay on my stream, but go follow Nick. Nick's got a good stream too, where he does a lot of cool dev stuff. But you're gonna kind of get a sense of like, would I want to work with that person? Like, if they're going to be in my team, like, do I want to be able to work with that personality? Do I think that that's going to work out? Those are things that you're going to be evaluating as a candidate. So if the company is actively stopping you from asking questions, then again, that's just another signal of maybe you don't want to work there. I think that showing that respect in a mutual way is super, super important in interviewing. All right. This next question, I've actually had like variations on a theme of this question. So let's dive in on this one. I did a bunch of online assessments for a site like Turing.com, but I haven't had any feedback or offers from their site. What should I do? I get these kinds of questions from time to time because I worked at the Turing School of Software and Design here in Denver, but their website is Turing.io, or now Turing.edu, because they got accreditation this year. And I think they were the first boot camp to actually get accreditation too, which was pretty fun to kind of go through. But I sometimes get people confused, like they look at my background or they hear me talk about working at Turing and they're like, oh yeah, I totally did this Turing.com thing. Well, Turing.com is a recruiting platform. It has nothing, there's no affiliation whatsoever to Turing, the school, the code school in Denver. They're completely unrelated. And so if you go to Turing.com, it's meant to be kind of a recruiting platform where you can do these assessments and so on. And then if they like you, they'll either hire you as a consultant or they'll kind of get you through an interview process and like present you to companies. That's my understanding of it anyway. Those kinds of platforms can be helpful, but again, you're still kind of relying on the trust that companies give to that platform. And so if I'm Acme Inc., and I know what Turing.com does and say, yeah, their interview process is a pretty good way to like funnel candidates into our sort of workflow, then if I trust their platform and you're a user on their platform, then it's like, okay, then now I trust that maybe I can skip that initial phone screen because they've done that initial phone screen. And if you make it through their process, then, it just saves us some time. So there are benefits to using platforms like that. But again, you're relying on the trust that a company has in that site, like in this particular case, Turing.com, and whatever sort of certification or scoring system that that site may sort of put on your profile to say that you've done certain quizzes or badges or something like that to show that you've got some amount of assessment skill that they've graded. I usually tell people, like, using a site like that where sometimes you have to pay to even use the site, it can be a good investment in your career. So it can be a good use of your money to invest in a site like that. And now I'm not in any way endorsing Turing.com. I'm just using it as an example. It can be a good investment in your career, but you have to make sure that you research them carefully and look for user reviews. And you want to look for unbiased reviews. Like, you need to find a review site where you can find both good and bad reviews about them. Because if you only ever see like absolutely glowing, 5-star reviews, that's probably not 100% honest. Does that mean that no company out there is like really awesome? I mean, there are companies out there that are great, but you're always going to find some amount of like negative feedback or something about it. So I would say find a review site where you can find unbiased reviews and really find out, like, is this going to be a good use of my money? Or do tons of people leave reviews saying like, oh, I gave them a bunch of money and I went through and I did the certification and then like I didn't get a job out of it and the certificate's kind of worthless. Again, if I go to like, Jim and Bob's code school and I get some certification, but nobody has any idea who they are or what they do and they don't trust their curriculum, then it's kind of wasted money and wasted time. Like, I would rather go to Udacity or something and get a nano degree. Like, as a hiring manager, I would see more value in like a Udacity nano degree because I trust that name as a brand than, some unknown sort of branded certification that you get. So those certifications are trusted differently by different kinds of companies. And so they can be beneficial, but it could also be detrimental if you just list like, oh yeah, I've done like 50 of the following like credentials and certificates online. It's like, okay, well, did you really have to go get 50? Or could you have just gotten like one really good one? Because a lot, like, there's going to be a ton of overlap in a lot of these things too. If you're like, oh, I did, this course on Udemy and this course on Udemy and this course on Udemy, it's like, okay, well, they're probably all like 80% of the same content. So what did you learn differently between all of them? So as a manager, when I see those kinds of things on a resume, if it's like a whole bunch of content from one platform, if it's a well-known platform like Udemy or Udacity or something like that, I'm going to give it more trust than, I followed some YouTube tutorial on how to do a thing. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't really matter then. Like I was sitting in on a Google event today. Google was doing, they have like this open source, open code kind of event that they do from time to time. And today was all about the Go language that they made back in 2007 or something. And, they're going through and they did like, just a couple of 15-minute tech talks. And then they did like this little quiz and giveaway thing. And someone actually asked in the live chat, like, is there any kind of certification for being here today? And it's like, dude, you're watching a bunch of pre-recorded videos that are only 15 minutes long and you want a certificate for being here? Like, what is that certificate going to do for you on a resume? It's going to do absolutely nothing. Like, I attended a tech conference for a day. It's like, who cares? Did you actually learn anything from it? Did you practice anything from it? Did you have a project? Like, what was the outcome of that? Because if I'm just sitting here watching videos and I'm not actually applying that knowledge, then to me as a hiring manager, that was it's not a good use of time. So using a site like Turing.com can be beneficial, but make sure you're doing your research, doing your homework on the company to make sure it's a worthwhile investment. That, they don't have like some kind of like, oh, you pay us X amount of dollars and there's no refund ever if you don't get, don't make it through our process or whatever, like you don't get that money back either. That to me would feel a little shady. I'm not saying that's what their practice is. Again, I'm just pulling examples out of the air. But I do get this question a little bit about Turing.com because I worked at the Turing School, which is Turing.edu, and they're just not related at all. Question from Van Radius in chat. What made me want to start streaming? That's a good question. So the Jonan Show, and I meant to do a little shout out plug-in, but I didn't get around to implementing it today. But if you go to twitch.tv, the Jonan Show, Go follow Jonan as well. Jonan's a really, really great guy. He works at New Relic, and he's got like a team of friends that he has on the stream, and it's called Code School Q&A. And it's just a bunch of advice. Like, you can literally go ask, like, how does this thing work? Or, and they also cater to a lot of like entry level kinds of questions. Like, hey, I'm trying to get into the tech industry. I've got a question about this or that. And they also do information about resumes and things like that. Well, I've been doing job coaching for almost 8 years now. And I've found that there's, I hesitate to use the word market. There's a lot of desire for this kind of content. And so part of it was just being on a different night than Jonan, but also covering some, like there's definitely overlap between my stream and Jonan's stream. And there are other people out there as well who do, interview-based information and so on. I think that the reason that I wanted to get into streaming was when I stopped teaching at Turing, I still wanted to have a platform where I can share my thoughts and perspectives on career development, getting into the tech industry. Not that the world needs another white guy with an opinion on the internet, but I come from a hiring background. Like, I've been a hiring manager. I've been an engineer in the industry for a long time. I've seen things, I've got opinions, and I'm just here to share the perspective. But my stream, like those that have watched the stream for a while know that I've also had a lot of people on the stream with me, and we do chats on like, hey, Nick, tell me your perspective about this kind of question. Or, like Van Radius, let's get you on the stream sometime and do a resume review with me and talk about like what I like on a resume and what you like on a resume, just to show people like there's no one way to make a resume in the tech industry. Like, every opinion you get is going to tell you something a little bit different. And I think that in the tech industry, because there's so many different viewpoints and so many different perspectives and so many different ways that you can learn a thing, that to me it feels a little bit like politics. For example, you might grow up, in a family where you have like one particular mindset, but as you kind of learn and hear perspectives from other people, you're going to start to form your own perspective on things. Like, I've got an idea for how I want to build a resume, so I'm going to go listen to a whole bunch of advice, and now I'm going to go make a resume based on all of this other advice, but I'm not just going to follow Ian's advice. And I highly recommend don't ever just follow my advice on things. I know some things, but like don't ever just form a resume the way I want you to form a resume, because I think that's it's a bit of a fallacy, because you need to have that perspective in order to form your own opinion on things, even how you code things. I think it's important to just hear a lot of opinions. And so part of me getting into streaming was just to share another perspective. And I've got like deep background on certain areas of engineering, certain areas of hiring and the interview practice and things like that. So that's why I got into streaming, and it's been a blast. I've been doing it for 4 months now, since early July. Took like a couple of episodes off here and there for the surgery and, just a little bit of burnout from other stuff going on. But what kind of traction? I've gotten so much more traction after meeting Ian. Oh, good to see you, Zooey. So I did a resume review for Zooey a couple of weeks back, and hopefully that was helpful. I like to share those thoughts and opinions. But again, don't just listen to my opinion. Like, go find other people. Like, there's tons of people on YouTube. There's tons of people that do live streaming on LinkedIn as well. I actually got approved to do live streaming on LinkedIn, so I'm trying to find a way of like multiplexing the streaming. There's a platform called Restream that I'm debating using, but it's a paid platform, and I don't know if I want to spend money on that just yet. But it'll actually stream to LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitch and YouTube all at the same time. The downside to that kind of platform is there's not one consolidated sort of chat area where if somebody leaves a comment on YouTube or on the chat on YouTube and someone leaves a comment on the chat on Facebook, like, does that all come to one place where I can address all of those questions in one place? And I haven't seen that yet. So that's the only reason that I haven't looked into that. But there are people that live stream advice all the time. Martin McGovern, who we've had on here, he runs the Career Therapy podcast. Aaron Mullinex, he's got a great YouTube channel. He took some time off, but he's back at it. Taylor Dason, I'm probably not pronouncing his last name right. He live streams on LinkedIn almost every day. Like, there are just tons of people out there that want to give you help and give you their thoughts and opinions on how to interview and how to think about career coaching and things about resumes and interview prep and all that kind of stuff, go listen to lots of advice. I think that's probably the number one thing that you can do. With some changes in my resume, I've received a lot more tech interviews. That's awesome. That's really great. I'd be curious now that we got you over that hurdle, Zooey. I'd be curious now where things start dropping off, or if they drop off. So sometimes I get people like, hey, I need help with the job hunt. Like, I'm having problems with the job hunt. And I always say, well, okay, well, is it a problem where you're applying and not getting a phone call, or you get a phone call but then you don't get an interview, or you get an interview but then you don't get an offer, or you don't advance through the interview process and then you don't get the offer? Like, where are you sort of dropping off in the process? Because then I can help you with that part of the process. And that's what any job coach is going to do. They're going to try to identify like where, like how far are you getting, and then where are you stopping? Let's work on that for the next sort of step. So yeah. And Zooey says in chat, he made a lot of great points I didn't see. With a few minor tweaks, it helped change some of the things in my resume and how I approached some interviews that led to get more tech interviews. That's great. I'm genuinely happy that I was able to help out on that. So thank you. Cool. Let's dive in on just a couple more questions. I think we'll wrap up, and I'll save some for next time. I think I'll do 2 more questions tonight, and then we'll kind of wrap up from there. This question's a little long, so it'll take me a second to kind of chop it up here for the video. Do most companies give any sort of grace period with their new hires to learn, like maybe a new language used by the company, or are you typically expected to hit the ground running on day one? I would say no company is going to expect you to completely hit the ground running on day one. I would say that there's absolutely going to be grace period, where when you make mistakes, they are going to be far more forgiving about those mistakes that you make than if you don't take a risk and only do safe things, and then like a year later you try to take a risk and something doesn't go well. And I'll give you some more specifics on that. So I would say you definitely want to take on riskier things earlier in your role and make those mistakes. Again, they know that you don't know everything about their process. Like, even if you're coming in as like a senior dev who, you know, maybe you've got a lot of experience, but you're still effectively a junior dev when you start a job at their company, because you don't know their system, you don't know their architecture, you don't know their deployment, you don't know their process. All of that's going to be brand new to you. So you're effectively a junior dev all over again. And there's going to be a lot more like forgiveness and like help and support that they're willing to offer you for that. But if you just kind of like, okay, well, I'm just going to take like the safe tickets, like stuff that I absolutely know I'm not going to screw up because I want to make a good impression, and you never take a risk on like, oh, I want to go take something where I need to stretch and learn, and maybe it's going to take a little bit longer than I thought. If you only do the safe stuff and you never do those things, and now you've been at the company a year and you're like, okay, I should probably take a risk on something, and something fumbles or you break production, now you've been there for a year and they're like, really? You've been here a year. Like, how could you make a mistake like that? Not that they're going to be like super critical about it, but I think that there's less grace to be given to you at that point because you've been there a while. You sort of should have known better. But I think if you make those mistakes earlier in your time with the company, then I think that they're going to be more willing and sort of forgiving on those things early on. So I would say the way around that, the kind of thing that you want to sort of focus on there is to have regular check-ins with people on your team, not just your manager, but like a team lead or something like that. And here's my thinking on this. If you check in with your team and your manager more frequently when you start that job, like maybe for the first month, you're going to meet with them every single week. And then for the rest of that 90 days or quarter or whatever, you're going to meet every 2 weeks, and then move to whatever regular cadence and just say like, hey, during this onboarding time, I want to make sure that there's a great feedback loop where I can make sure I'm meeting your expectations and that I can also give you feedback on the things that I've learned. So when you go to that sort of check-in meeting, you want to bring notes about things that you've written down, architecture diagrams that you've drawn, the way that you currently understand the system, and then have them critique it and correct it for accuracy. That's how you're going to spend that time in that meeting. Because then they're like, okay, well, you got a pretty good handle. This is like 90% right, but this part over here needs correction. So let's just get that stuff written in. And now you walk away from there, you've got even more knowledge than you had before. But they also now see the progress of like, cool, did you see all that stuff that they wrote down? Like they've really been documenting this stuff really well. And now they've got trust that you're up to speed and that you understand these things. But if you're just kind of sitting in the corner, staying quiet and because you don't want to like have a spotlight on you kind of thing, they only go on kind of blind assumption that you know what's going on. And even if they do like, hey, we're going to meet once a month, in a one-on-one, and they're like, how are things going? You're like, good. And that's all you ever talk about. Then they make an assumption, they make a presumption maybe that everything's okay, that you really know what's going on. But I think if you take those risks early on in your career and you document all this stuff and you get them to help you correct it, and then you prove to them that you're writing things down and that you're actively learning this stuff, it can't help but to have that level of trust increase from them, to go, okay, cool. Like Ian's on the ball with this stuff. He's got a really good handle on this stuff. And so if somebody's got a question about it, Ian's actually got this thing documented really well. Like go talk to Ian and get a copy of Ian's notes. Or maybe I'm going to take all those notes and I'm going to say like, hey, you know what? You didn't have a ton of onboarding material, but hey, now that I'm writing all this stuff down, guess what? We got a ton of onboarding material. So the next person you hire doesn't have to go through all the stuff that I did. Or let me sit down with them and brain dump into them. Now that you've helped correct my knowledge and you're confident that I know these things, let me then go teach it to someone else. When you teach something to someone else, it cements your knowledge and your learning in that particular area even more. And so I think that these are just all super beneficial things to the team. So make those risks early, document everything you can, and have more frequent check-ins. But yes, companies will absolutely give you more grace when you start a new job. They may have different expectations based on your skill level and your experience of like, hey, we're hiring you because you're an expert in Docker. And so when you come on board, we really want you to like get up and running really quick on, putting all this stuff into containers and helping us with deployments and things like that. And so they may ask you really early on in your job, hey, can we sit down and you do like a quick little, learning session on what is Docker? How do we build it? How do we get it on our laptops? How do we start building containers? How do these things communicate? Like, can you teach us some of that just to get us started on it too? So again, kind of coming back to an answer that I talked about earlier about like just sharing knowledge across the team. That's an important kind of role in all of this. Cool, Van Ray, it's good to see you on chat. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for dropping by tonight, and thanks for sharing your thoughts in chat too. Appreciate that. All right, last question I think for the night, and then we'll wrap up from here. What are some things that every entry-level web developer should know? How much time you got? There's so much to learn. There's so many things that you need to know. I think that there are some sort of core fundamentals based on your discipline. Like, do you consider yourself full stack? Do you consider yourself front end? Do you consider yourself back end? And I think that there are some common things that you could learn no matter what. And then I think that based on whether you're front end or back end or full stack, I think that you can kind of expand the knowledge out. But I would say I want to be careful about the expectation of what you should know. I think should is a very loaded thing. We kind of talked about loaded questions earlier. And I think that this one can come across as like, are there things you absolutely must know? I don't want to come across as like gatekeeping of like, oh, if you don't know this thing, then you're not a web developer. That's not kind of what I'm getting at here. But as a hiring manager, my hope would be that somebody who has studied web development and has learned enough to be able to apply for a job would have some basic knowledge. And so I've got a handful of things that I think would be helpful to know. These are not like you must absolutely know these things, but these are also not going to come across as like, the typical sorts of answers. Like a front-end developer, I'm not going to say you should go learn HTML and CSS because that's kind of a given as a front-end developer. As a back-end developer, it's kind of a given that you should have some idea of how to use a framework to build some kind of app, in some sort of scaffolding sort of system. Those are just kind of givens, maybe a little bit of like database kind of stuff. Those are givens. What I want to talk about are like some of the icing on the cake. Like these would be really cool if you happen to know these things. I would say from a fundamental point of view, though, one thing that I think is a really critical part of understanding how we do what we do as web developers or internet developers is, how does the web actually work? How does the internet actually work? What is the HTTP lifecycle? And then what's the difference between HTTP 1.1, HTTP 2, what is Web 3? Like even just a really high level cursory knowledge of how those different protocols work, I think is helpful no matter what discipline you find yourself sort of leaning towards. Like, I'm a front-end developer. Well, you should still kind of have some idea of how HTTP works. Like HTTP 1.1, what's in a request, what's in a response? Like, just break those things down. Because when you're looking at that stuff in your Chrome developer tools, you'll have a better idea of like where to go find information and how things kind of played out. And so having some knowledge about that can be helpful. On the back end, if you understand how HTTP works, you'll have a better understanding of, whether you're writing RESTful sort of endpoints or not, you'll have a better idea as well about how the data is coming in and how you're sending the data back out to a front end. So I think that that's like one thing that everybody sort of should know. Again, I use the should in quotes. But really, that's the only like really fundamental thing that I think an entry-level developer should study. But kind of this icing on the cake, I got a handful of things that I think would be really helpful. For a front-end developer, I think it would be really helpful to know, like, how does the browser actually load your code and execute it? Like, when does it start actually building the DOM, the document object model, I think is what DOM stands for. There's also the shadow DOM, where it's kind of like building stuff to then like render out. When does rendering actually happen? When does it start actually applying styling? When does the JavaScript in your code actually get executed? Because it matters whether it's in like the head block or in the body. What about like the whole document ready sort of signal that the browser throws? Like, hey, I've rendered everything, so document's ready. And now other things that are waiting for that signal kind of event, now they can start kicking off and go, cool, everything's good, everything's rendered. Let's start loading all this, AJAX stuff. I think that those are really nice things to have as a front-end developer. Now, should you know all those things as an entry-level dev? No. But if you could learn those things, that kind of stuff is going to really differentiate you in an interview if you've got that deeper knowledge. So again, going back to a question that we addressed earlier on the stream, and for those listening to the podcast, it'll be in a previous question that you can go find, where I was talking about kind of the T-shaped engineer, where you've got a breadth of knowledge and then going really deep on certain things, or very few things early in your career. Your depth of knowledge is going to be fewer things, but you're going to go extra deep on that kind of stuff. This would be one of those things where if you've got that kind of thing, it's going to really set you apart in the interview process. And I think that it would be a good thing to know. For a backend developer, I would say learning about building and consuming APIs, that may already be part of whatever curriculum that you've studied, whether you went to a code school or whether you're studying like Free Code Camp or Udemy courses or Udacity, things like that. Building and consuming APIs, how to build out your code for things like system-oriented architecture could be helpful. Back, way back in the day, everything was monolith, and then everybody hopped on the kind of the microservice bandwagon, and then it was all like, oh, you must absolutely know everything about microservices and everything needs to be a microservice. And I did a whole topic on, when would you build a monolith versus a microservice architecture kind of application, because there are pros and cons to both. And not everything needs to be like this fully blown out service-oriented architecture, microservice kind of thing. But it can still be helpful to have a cursory knowledge of, I've looked into it. I haven't implemented it, but I have an idea of what it means. So when you say SOA or service-oriented architecture, I at least am familiar with the term, that I can kind of understand what it is you're talking about. If you can actually spend time and like build that out, again, it's just going to differentiate you on stuff like that. Learning things like Docker for deployments, Travis CI or Circle CI, some sort of like continuous integration, continuous deployment, that can also be beneficial on the front end as well. If you're deploying to like Netlify or Firebase or something like that, those can also be really useful tools. But again, I think that those are just differentiators, and they're not necessarily something that I would endorse as these are must-have skills. But if you have them, you are absolutely going to stand out especially as an entry-level dev. That said, I know senior level devs that don't know some of this stuff. So I want to really stress, like, don't take this as Ian said I had to do this, or I'm not a web developer. I'm not saying that whatsoever. Everybody's got opinions, and some of them stink, right? And so that might come across as one of my opinions that kind of stinks. I think that there are so many topics out there that you could go learn. When you sign up for a job in the tech industry, you are signing up for lifelong learning. As an entry-level dev, though, I want to be careful to say from my perspective that you don't have to go learn all these things in order to feel ready enough to go apply for a job. Whatever level of skill you have, if you think that that meets enough of the criteria to go apply for that job, go apply for that job. You don't have to have 100% of the things that they say on that job post. Like, if you look at that job post and you go, they're asking for 10 things and I only know 9 of them, so I'm not going to go apply. I'm going to go learn that 10th thing, and then once I feel like I know it enough, then I'm going to go apply for that job. Well, guess what? By the time you learn it, that job post is probably gone. Unless it's a giant company and they're constantly hiring for that role. They're probably not going to keep that role open forever. So just go apply for the job anyway. Because you've got 9 of the 10 skills. Well, guess what? They've probably got a bunch of resumes where they only had 3 of those skills. You've got 9. You're already ahead of those other people. So go apply for the job anyway. I don't think that there's any danger in that. Especially if it's something like, oh, I don't know that specific programming language. Well, if you have a deep enough knowledge, so kind of going back to that depth of knowledge, if you have a really deep enough knowledge in any programming language, you're going to be able to go learn any other programming language. So don't get hung up on the tech stack that they're asking for. You can always learn the tech stack. What you have to convince them in the interview is how you're going to transfer the skill from that tech that you do know really well because you've gone deep on it, and how you're going to transfer that knowledge to this other skill that they want you to have. That's the selling point in the interview of, like, yeah, I know Ruby really well. You're looking for somebody that knows Python. Well, because I know Ruby really well and I've built all these projects in Ruby, I'm going to be able to transfer that knowledge over to Python. I'm going to get up to speed. I'm going to be proficient within a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. I'm going to have people on the team that I can learn from, so I'm not going to be alone in this. I'm going to look for courses and stuff like that. I'm going to study on my own time. I might port some of my projects from Ruby into Python just to help get me up to speed. Like, I'm going to get up to speed on this. That's really what the interview is going to be, is you convincing them that you can transfer that knowledge. Because any other job you go get, if you know Travis CI and they use Circle CI, well, they're close enough. You understand the fundamentals. You just have to go learn the specifics about Circle CI and take what you know about Travis CI and, like, apply that knowledge to Circle CI instead. Same thing with frameworks, as I talked about in another question, where if you know Ruby on Rails, which is MVC design pattern, and you want to go to some other MVC framework, you'll be able to transfer that knowledge because you've studied that design pattern well enough and worked with that design pattern enough that it's like, okay, well, where do I put my controller code? Where do I put my model code? How do I build my views? Voila. Now I'm up to speed on this MVC framework too. And so the deeper you go on something, the easier you're going to be able to transfer that knowledge. You just have to sell them on that as part of your interview. Cool. Let's catch up on chat a little bit. Got to jump off, catching up with a coworker in Thailand. Cool. Good to have you on chat, Nick. Zooey says, this is very true. Apply anyway. Some of the descriptions are more of their wants. Exactly. I typically see those job posts as like, this is my birthday wish list. Like, if I can find somebody with all of these qualities, that would be amazing. But they're also like a complete mythical unicorn that doesn't exist. Sometimes it's literally just like buzzword bingo of like, throw out all the things and see how many people lie on their resume that they've actually got all those skills. Like, I want somebody with 15 years of React experience. I guarantee you're going to get at least one resume where they're like, oh yeah, I've totally been using React for 15 years. It's only been out for like, 6 or 7 years. Like, nobody's got that level of experience. And so that's also one way that, some companies will actually filter for people that lie on their resume, is they'll put some outrageous, request in their job post and see how many people actually claim to have that skill or claim to have that amount of skill. But yeah, I would say, like, don't let the job post scare you away from applying. I think it's important that you apply anyway. Cool. Well, that ended up being a really quick hour and a half. I wasn't expecting it to go that long, but here we are. Cool. Anything else going on in chat? Anybody else got any questions? I'm happy to just kind of hang out for a little bit and just chat and see how things are going. Yeah. Zooey, any interviews coming up? Anything I can help out with as far as like your interview prep and company research and things like that? You need any extra tips or anything I can help out with there? Let me know. Happy to kind of address that, or if anyone else is in chat and you got questions about interview process or career coaching, anything like that, I'd love to help out as well. Zooey, 2 tech interviews tomorrow. Well, dude, go get some sleep. Stalked them on LinkedIn already. Good job. Yeah, so learn what you can about the company. Make sure that you've got a copy of the job post, like while you're interviewing. So as you're describing things, you can kind of refer back to that, or like study the job post. But definitely get a good night's sleep. Drink extra water tonight. That's going to like kind of help flush out your system, and your melatonin levels will like help with memory recall and stuff like that tomorrow. But good luck in those interviews. That's exciting. I'm not sure when you hopped on the stream, but I had a handful of sort of announcements or whatever as far as the stream went. I'll just get them back here on the screen. So the daily email series is going to be splitting from 1 list into 4. And so right now it's a blend of technical and behavior questions, and I'm going to be splitting them out. I'm going to be doing a whole mailing on just technical questions, one on just behavioral questions, another one that's just general Q&A around like, how do you prepare? Like what kinds of things do you prepare? How do you do company research and stuff like that? And then another one just on the interview process itself, and like different sort of steps and stages and things to consider at each stage. So that's going to be split into 4 by the end of November. That's my goal, is to get all that stuff written and edited and built and ready to start sending by the end of November. We'll see how that goes. And then I'm going to start doing a lot more live coding. So I'll be live coding during the day. I'll be live coding in the evenings. The coding that I do in the evenings are going to be about TechInterview.Guide. And it's going to be like, kind of this video processor thing where I'm like splitting up the video and the audio and stuff like that. Mostly for like these Q&A sessions, so I can kind of like split up the like the little snippets of all the questions that I do for the YouTube shorts and the podcasts and stuff like that. So I'm gonna do some open source around like how I do all that, and then like share that code out there. So if anybody's got ideas and suggestions, but then I'm also gonna be live coding during the day, and that stuff is gonna be work related. So it'll be stuff that I do at Stream, and it'll all be like test-driven development on like building a Go API and stuff like that. Ramcode's good to see you in chat. Hello. First time chat, so welcome to the stream. Glad to have you hanging out. We're basically just winding down and kind of wrapping up for the night here. Go see if we can raid somebody. We might go raid Chris Perillo. He works at Intel, I believe. Yeah, I think we'll go raid Chris. Chris has been really into 3D printing lately as well, and he's also a huge Star Wars nerd. So we'll probably go raid him in a minute. But yeah, so I'm going to be doing live coding during the day, and I'll make sure that the emails that go out, so if you're following me on Twitch, the emails that go out, it'll let you know that I'm doing stuff for Stream or I'm doing stuff for Tech Interview Guide, so that stuff will be clear in those emails that go out, just so it doesn't, people don't show up like during the day, expecting me to be doing more like tech interview Q&A and stuff like that. This is all kind of on my own time, but cool. Good to have you in chat, Ramcodes. Hope you're doing good. Thanks for the follows as well. Had a couple of folks follow Practical Dev and Croto. Not sure how to pronounce the username there, but appreciate the follows. It's always great. Yeah, I stream twice a week, just specifically around tech interview prep and career prep. This coming Sunday, don't really have any topic planned. The following Sunday, though, I'm going to have a whole panel of folks on here that went to a code school and then got like tech adjacent jobs. So they didn't get 100% like software development job as that first job. They got like a job in QA, or they got a job in like sales engineering, or they went into DevOps and things like that. So I'm going to have that panel that's going to be on the 14th, I believe. Yeah, it'll be the 14th of November. So that's the Sunday night. That's on a Sunday night, not this coming Sunday. This coming Sunday is November 7th. Yeah, I'll be streaming Sunday and then Thursday next week. Probably more general Q&A kind of stuff. I don't really have any topics yet, but I may have a few things to kind of talk about and share along the way. But keep sending in the questions. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. I don't know if these buttons are going to work on. My stream deck is broken. All right, well, let's do this. So in chat, I can do bang LinkedIn and bang YouTube. So that'll tell you how to reach out to me on LinkedIn. So everybody on my stream, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Actually connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't just follow me. Send a connection request and let me know that you watched the stream. I'm happy to make introductions and help facilitate finding those jobs and stuff like that. I love helping people out. So any way that I can use my platform and my privilege and my area of being in tech to help other people, I'm definitely going to do. So if you need, interview advice, if you need to know, like, do I know somebody at a particular company, I can share those kinds of details on like how to search through my profile to go see if I know somebody at Microsoft or something like that. If you really want to like do some networking and outreach that way, I'm happy to make as many of those introductions as people need. So connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know that you saw the stream or that you watched this on YouTube. If you're hanging out on YouTube and you made it through an hour and 46 minutes of the video, definitely like and subscribe. If you've watched it this much, you must like what you see. Yeah, go ahead and like it. And we'll see you on Sunday for the next stream. In the meantime, like I said, I will be doing more live streaming during the day and occasionally during the evenings if I'm taking a break from writing up the mailing list stuff. But hang out again and let's chat some more. I'm probably going to do my open source stuff for stream. I'll be writing that stuff in Go. The stuff that I'll be doing on the side for the video processing and so on, I'm probably just going to throw together a Rails project for that. It'll be quick and simple, and I'm just going to have it running on this little Linux box back here that's just powering this monitor. I'm just going to like put all that code on this machine, so I won't actually be deploying it out to the internet anywhere. So I'm not too worried about like data security and stuff like that. It's just going to be like a file name and timestamps and let it go from there. But it'll have like all my API keys and stuff like that. So I won't be sharing that stuff on the stream, obviously, but it'll be fun, I think, to kind of do that in a transparent way of like, how do I think about designing out like the database and everything I'm going to need for that. So it'll be fun to kind of go through that. Cool. I'm going to wrap up here. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Be kind to one another. Let's go raid Chris Perillo. So I'm going to go get that set up here and then raid Chris Perillo. Make sure I spell it right. Nope, I spelled his name wrong. Perillo. There we go. All right, cool. Well, we'll see you over on Chris's channel, and we'll be back on this stream on Sunday. Cool. Have a good night, everyone.